this is absolutely what I wanted. Like, this is what was in my head. And that was just like solidifying, like, okay, if I'm feeling this way, this person who I didn't even like really tell what was going on is like coming at the same project the same way. Cool, I think we got a good idea. And, you know, so I filled it out. I asked my buddy Mark Rose from Spitalfield if he'd be interested.
So this week on The Record Process, we invited musician and industry veteran Matt Burns to the show for a special look into a recently released cover compilation that made waves in the punk rock community. As the label manager of SmartPunk Records, Matt had a unique perspective and a huge role in piecing together the concept for the label's recently released Blink-182 covers compilation. The compilation was called Untitled, as told by SmartPunk and Friends, and Matt shares with us the detailed process behind bringing this project to fruition. He speaks about the challenges they faced in developing the concept, pitching it to artists, assembling the track list, handling creative decisions along the way, sorting out royalty splits, and ultimately getting it all manufactured. All while staying true to the ethos of SmartPunk and the artists that they support. So initially, we asked Matt to join us to speak about the A&R and manufacturing phases of making records. But I think we ended up uncovering some ideas that run much deeper, and it's all ahead right after this. So let's say you've just finished the latest round of mix revisions, or the last few tracks on a production you've been working on, but you want instant feedback before you go and ship them out. That's where Audio Mover steps in. Their revolutionary technology allows you to stream high-quality audio in real time, making remote collaboration a breeze. And with Audio Mover's Listen To plugin, there's no need for complicated setups or endless file sharing. Simply stream your audio directly from your favorite DAW to anyone, anywhere in the world in real time. And now with their newest plugin, they've made it possible to apply binaural rendering to Dolby Atmos mixes, allowing you to monitor how the spatial audio will sound on Apple Music. Through innovations like this, Audio Movers is leading a revolution in web-based audio transmission and reimagining the way musicians, podcasters, and educators engage with the world around them. So check them out at audiomovers.com and start your free trial today. One of the toughest hurdles for musicians and producers to overcome is recognizing when it's time to let your music go. So stop letting your music sit there on a hard drive waiting for the perfect label scenario to show up. Let DistroKid help you start reaching the fans you deserve right now. There's a reason why DistroKid is the go-to platform for independent musicians across all genres, and it's because they offer seamless and affordable solutions to distribute your music worldwide. Get your tracks on all the most popular streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and so many more in just a few steps. Time is often money, and DistroKid understands that. So they've eliminated long wait times for processing your music in the system. And in fact, they can get your music live in as little as 24 to 48 hours now. The simplicity of the platform and features like automatic revenue splits and YouTube content IDs make distributing your music and collecting payments incredibly simple. DistroKid does not take a percentage of your royalties, and for one low annual fee, you keep 100% of what you own. It's straightforward, transparent, and affordable. So follow the link in our show notes to get 30% off your new DistroKid membership and start letting your music work for you. If you're a solo musician, a singer, a songwriter, or part of a band, you know that the journey does not end once you have that finished master in hand. Building a lasting career around your music requires a lot of additional activities to do things like develop, promote, and ultimately monetize your creative vision. And for those of us that aren't quite doing Taylor Swift level numbers yet, it helps to have a merchandising partner that can meet you where you're at right now. And SmartPunk MFG is a perfect solution for any and all merch manufacturing needs your band might have. From the first note to the final stitch, they have it all covered with whatever you might need. They do screen printing, they do embroidery, stickers, vinyl and CD production, posters, and pretty much everything else under the sun. They are an incredibly comprehensive online merch solution offering reasonable prices and feasible quantities for bands of all sizes. So go check out some samples of what they can do at smartpunkmfg.com. And when you're ready, just shoot them an email at info@smartpunkmfg.com and mention the record process to get 10% off your first order. So remember, that's SmartPunkMFG, and it's where creativity meets manufacturing excellence. Matt Burns, welcome to the record process.
Howdy.
This is going to be a fun one, Matt. How are you doing?
I am doing very good. I am well hydrated. I think I'm got all my bases covered, just kicking ass during the day. We're trying to, at least,
Amazing. Hydration is the key to success. We know that, especially for two guys that do a lot of talking.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in this format these days. With that said, for those that don't know, you work for SmartPunk Records, and you are, as we were in terms of titles, you wear a lot of hats over there. Yeah. But for the sake of this conversation, one of the broadest ones is probably label manager. But I would love to start, before we dive into this one specific project case study at hand, that's going to be a fun one, and it's been a really cool project that you've been working on for quite some time. Why don't you tell people that maybe aren't familiar or maybe have heard of SmartPunk, or maybe might know an artist or may not have at all, what the label's about and how you came to be the label manager over there and what got you involved with them?
So SmartPunk, I think the easiest way to go back to it is, there was smartpunk.com, which was kind of your place to get band merch and CDs from the early 2000s. Hosted a bunch of bands on the Warped Tour. I remember there's one year it was like Seosin from First to Last, Under Oath, The Bled, all on the SmartPunk stage at Warped Tour. I think it was 2004, if my old age isn't failing me right now.
I won't fact check you on
yeah,
it.
Please do not. Nobody fact check me.
Sure.
We're going with it. But yeah, so SmartPunk has had its footing in music for a while. Exchanged a bunch of hands, came to my parent company, I think 2010 or 2011, started off with doing like YouTube things, like covers and interviews, like artists would come in, break songs down, stuff like that. That wasn't really doing anything for anybody, so they laid it to rest. And then probably 2015, 2016, my buddies Jordan and Grant were like, hey, why don't we start a vinyl reissue label? Like, we already have the SmartPunk name, we have this Game Face record. We have this Set Your Goals record. Neither have been on vinyl for a while. What if we start doing this? I feel like there's, Enjoy the Ride, Mightier Than Sword. There are a couple of like reissued labels around that time. And we're like, let's just jump into that. So that's kind of where SmartPunk came into the closest of what it is today, is kind of a vinyl-centric label. And they started doing that. They're putting out their own band's records. They're putting out friends' bands' records. And then they were getting approached by other bands, locally, domestically, kind of all over the place. And they're like, we don't know what to do. We're going to chill out for a bit. Aside from that, we brought back smartpunk.com. It was a vinyl distro site, much like RevHQ or anything of that kind of sort. SRC Vinyl does that sort of distro stuff as well. So we're doing that. And we would go to festivals. We'd pop up with our little tent, put a bunch of tables out, and it's a walk up. You are in a record store. We have 1,000+ titles all throughout, and you're kind of just browsing through, picking stuff up, rare stuff, limited stuff, what have you. So that's kind of where I jump in. Is I was working for Starbucks at the time, and my buddy Alex, who had joined the team, who had come from like a local record store here, joined SmartPunk. He was like, hey, do you want to like jump in the van? We're going to Riot Fest. Misfits are playing. Like, you won't get paid, but you get to go, you'll get fed, whatever. And I'm like, shit, hell yeah. I don't have anything else to do. Why not? So jump in the van, drive up with all these records, get there, unload, have fun with everybody. It's a great time. And on the way back, they're kind of like, okay, well, this was awesome. Like, you've helped so much. What would you think about kind of helping out with the label? Like, we're kind of evolving, getting a little bit bigger. We're trying to beef up our social media. We're trying to beef up, newsletters, mail order, kind of get all that stuff going out faster. And I was like, yeah, I work from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. 5 days a week. I've got my entire afternoons to do stuff with. So sure, I'll come on by. So for a while I was, doing kind of the lowly work of mail order, and I would do hand numbering all the records that we do exclusives for, because we also do exclusives for other labels and stuff like that. And then it got to a point where it's like, hey, we are getting all these inquiries, we're putting out all these records. No one person is really kind of taking a hold of this, emailing distros, emailing stores, setting up one sheets, any of that stuff. And I was kind of like, oh shit, I'll do it. Like, why not? This has been really fun. My background, I've come from a music side. I was in a band. I'm still in a band. I ran an all ages venue. I worked at a recording studio. So I'd done like the artistic side. Never had I done the business side. So I was like, shoot, I'm always down to learn more stuff. Why not take a try at this? And that kind of is just what I did day by day, looking at my heroes and people that I look up to and how they do it, asking a lot of questions and still learning, figuring it all out. Industry, as you know, is changing faster than anyone can imagine. So it's just always growing, always learning, and kind of trying to anticipate what happens next with that. So that brings me here where, now we have, I don't even know, 20 plus bands on our roster. We're looking at almost 125, 130 releases under our belt now. And just having fun with the whole thing, making friends and meeting people along the way.
I love that. What a cohesive origin story that, like any great one, starts out with, fuck it, I don't really have anything better to do. Yeah, I'll go.
Dude.
I love that so much.
That's the way you do it. That's the Henry Rollins way to do it.
That is, so much came of it, and such a cool, kind of trajectory switch for you. But also, like you said, you well-versed and very familiar with that community and the artistic side of it, being in bands, playing, writing music, right? And I think that's usually probably the best, and if we had to guess, probably the most common crossover foundation or starting point for a lot of people that work in the business side of music. But that's, you kind of teed it up perfectly there by saying, you're familiar with that, right? You can do punk shows, you can do playing in a band, you can do, touring in the van. But this opportunity came up, and that's honestly kind of precisely why I wanted to have you specifically on the show, to shed light on a bit more of how the greater idea of records getting made and getting put together, because obviously most of the episodes on this show talk about the creation process of the songs themselves, the actual things contained within the physical medium, right? And usually a lot of it focuses on what happens before or leading up to or during the studio time, right? And obviously, most of the releases that the label deals with also all have that in common as well. It is music affixed to a tangible format. Mm-hmm. However, I thought that maybe highlighting one specific project that y'all have kind of championed recently would be really fun to give kind of like a 360 view of what goes into putting a record together from the label side of things. And then not only that, but I always, we talk about this a lot on the show as well. The journey doesn't just end the second you get the final masters back from your engineer. It's honestly just like this. That's like the starting point for it, right? Like that's where life begins. And so much more goes into releasing that thing, unleashing it into the wild, curating who sees it, how they see it, when they see it, and ultimately, hopefully, how listeners can come to digest it and experience it, right? Mm-hmm. And then if you want to go even further, how that kind of all cycles back to the artists and the creators at hand that were initially responsible for that, right? So, I think a lot of people that listen to the show might be familiar with how to pick up a guitar, pick up an instrument, make a song, right? There's a lot more that goes into it, of course, as we know. But I thought this was a cool opportunity to dive into this one project at hand, which is actually, I'll let you kind of introduce it too, because obviously you were championing a lot of it, but it's more than just a single LP by one artist. It's actually a cover compilation by an artist that I think they've had a relative amount of success. I don't know how to quantify it, but they've recently come back in form and in original fashion. So why don't you make the official reveal, Matt? What project is it that we're going to be talking about today?
So we took a dive and decided to do a Blink-182 Untitled record covers comp.
Yeah.
A lot of people call it self-titled. I call it untitled. I feel like I've heard the band members call it Untitled. That's what I'm going with. Whatever it may be, so be it. It's the one with the little smiley guy on the cover. So
Perfect form. I love that.
little fan of me. They were actually, I mean, this band means a lot to me. They were my first like rock concert. I went to see, my older brother had listened to them like for a while. And then obviously with Enema of the State, they got on the PV and all the stuff, and they did the Mark Town Travis show. They came to South Florida. My brother's like, I got us tickets. It was them. Phoenix TX open, Bad Religion was in the middle. And I just remember the next day going to like Best Buy or FYE. I bought the Bad Religion record, like saw who they thanked in the liner notes, bought the Phoenix TX record, saw who they thanked in the liner notes. And that was like, that was my dive into punk. It was like, that was one side of it. And then at the same time, I was going to Newfound Glory, like local shows in South Florida, and, you know, seeing freaking Pharmaceutical Bandits is what they were called back then. Saves the Day, Alkaline Trio, like all these bands. So it was like both of these things coming at me with a super impressionable mind. That was like the same time that I picked up a guitar, started writing songs, like started like learning how to write lyrics. So it was like, it was just, I had been run over by this whole thing that I let consume my entire life as an early teen. And it, I think, changed me for the better. You know, I've met everyone that I know because of like those moments. I feel like that was a very pivotal like branch in my timeline. So why not pay homage to my heroes? Blink-182, my favorite record by them, which is the Untitled one. It's also controversial. Everyone's like, well, that one, you know, I stopped listening after Dude Ranch. Or that was the first thing. I reached out to a bunch of people. A lot of bands that I wanted to be on this were like, oh, I don't really know that record. I stopped listening after Dude Ranch. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, you know, do you want to check it out? And they're like, no, that's fine. Like, not for me. And I was like, yep, no problem. You know, it was kind of at the tail end of the band where, you know, things weren't necessarily about farts and poop and boobs and stuff like that. But for me, it was just sonically something that like moved me. Like at the same time, I was getting into like post-hardcore and like emo and like all this stuff. And like I remember hearing Robert Smith on that record, and I was just like, dude, you could do what, like, you don't have to be just pop punk. Or if you want to be pop punk, you don't have to stay within these like parameters. You can do whatever you want. And it's probably easier when you are Blink-182, kind of already making headlines across the world. But it was just a really cool eye-opening moment for me to like, probably same thing that was championing the sellout term in the 90s. It's like, it's not selling out. It's just doing whatever the fuck you want to do and like going by whatever you want, you know. And then there's the Boxcar Racer record and like all this cool shit that was happening around that camp at that time. Travis doing the transplants, like there was so much cool stuff happening. So for me, this record was the one to do. And it kind of started as a pandemic project. Like we were talking about it and like bands weren't really sure what to do. There were all these online shows that were happening, people going live on Instagram, doing things. I was like, well, why don't we try to see if we can like put out this thing while no one can like go out and enjoy music and just see what happens. So I would say the idea started 2020, probably fall 2020, and just kept blossoming and changing and growing, and getting denials from some bands jumping on. And, you know, up until I would say February of 2023, we were working on getting in songs, getting in artists, all that stuff. So it was like, we got it in as soon as I got the masters. I was like, I reached out to this guy, Sam, who he made our logo. He works for The Simpsons, awesome illustrator. He did the front cover. My buddy Tad did the liner notes and stuff like that. And we just kind of like balls to the wall, got everything going, put it into production. And yeah, here we are in November. It's coming out November 17th. And it's been a roller coaster of shit, good and bad, all happening. So
that's kind of exactly why I wanted to highlight and dive deep into each stage of what it's like to be the person putting this together and to be on the team putting this together, right? So the first thing that I would love to highlight and that I think is really important to recognize about something like this, or just about someone in your position working for a record label and, all kind of collectively deciding which projects to greenlight, is that I think a lot, and I was one of these kids for so long that, the narrative of like labels just care about money and like they're just, they'll just sign anything if it'll make them money. And it can be a really vapid view of what that's like. But one of the things that I do love specifically about SmartPunk, but then just a lot of smaller labels in general, and even a lot of independent labels in general, is that the best things that have the best weight and hold the best resonance and meaning are the ones that are ultimately fueled by people that are artists themselves at a label, that know that have that kind of strong feeling and passion. If for no other reason than the first thing that I wanted to highlight about this is that this thing took how many years to put together? And that's step number one, where I think a lot of people would be like, and I'm sure you've heard it, and I'm sure you've thought the same thing whenever, it's like, oh, somebody's putting out a Taylor Swift covers compilation or whatever. People are like, that's just a cash grab. That's just like, because they know it's just another band trying to do like, a big cover song and hoping that they go viral, right? It's like, there's way more to it sometimes than meets the eye. And this is a perfect example of what people don't consider is how much time and how much of a like unrepaid time, it really is and has to be a labor of love that goes into a lot of these things, because you, as someone at a label, know that when you see something like this come up in a potential roundtable of, okay, here's an idea, we're brainstorming it. The second you say go, it's not like, oh, cool, next week we will just have this and it'll be out. So you have to take that into consideration and really say, hey, not only do we think, is this something that financially we can do and is a sound decision from a business standpoint on the business side of it, but it also has to be something that like, do we feel like we resonate with it as 100%. A group of people, and that it is ultimately something that can be meaningful within that community. And that's kind of the second thing that you already mentioned in talking about where the idea came from and how much this band meant to you and obviously many other people. So that's the biggest thing. But then beyond that, you're then kind of initially tasked with, well, a number of questions, probably, I would imagine. But we'll probably start here. Okay, we have the idea. It's this record. We want bands to cover it, right? Mm-hmm. How do you begin putting together a list of potential bands to outreach to, and ultimately pitching the project, right? Because that's the first step, is you have to explain what this is, why you're doing it, and what it will entail. And what's interesting enough is actually I realized that I can, as we're saying this, I can kind of turn this into hey, teach me, because I'm actually taking on a potential, and have been already actually for the last like probably year or more. And we've barely broken ground on a few of the tracks, a compilation project of my own. And I've realized I've already bitten off so much more than I thought, right? But it's something that's near and dear to me that will be fun, and I hopefully has a really meaningful outcome. But so I'm in what we would call the A&Ring phase, right? Where you're going out. So talk to me about that first step, where you're like, okay, well, who's going to be on it? What are the tracks, right? And where do you go with that?
So it started with me reaching out internally to all of our bands, or most of our bands. And just because I feel like I knew some people were like already in a record cycle or working on a record, and I was like, I don't want to bother them with this kind of thing. Because like, again, 2020, I thought we'd have this done by 2021. So it starts with that, reaching out internally, getting bands involved and being like, hey, we're doing this record. It might not be up your alley, but if you want to be a part of it, I think it's going to get a lot of different eyes than what would normally look at your project per se. Like my band, Debt Neglector, we are a skate punk 90s kind of like Fat Wreck sort of band. I was like, hey, there's going to be some like, obviously, here's a Blink-182 record. No one in my band really listens to Blink-182. Like they know the hits, whatever. But I'm like, I'm doing this thing. We should do it. We're going to be on this with like some other bands, it might go viral. You never know. You never know who's going to hear this. There might be 3 people who check it out, like our cover, check out our band, and our band changes their life. That would be awesome. You know what I mean? The amount of times that I bought like a Fat Wreck comp or Epitaph, like Punkorama comp, that I heard a band that I had never heard of before, No Use for a Name. I heard No Use for a Name on a comp, and then like immediately bought Late Chicken Carne. And like, that's songwriting, like epitome for me. Like that was the band that was like crushing it for me as a teen. So I was like, you never know what could happen with this. So reaching out internally and getting yeses, nos, like not fit for it, whatever, while also like signing new bands, then pitching those bands. Like there's a lot kind of all happening at one time. And then it was also bands that we were talking to, either that we were playing shows with or our bands were playing shows with or whatever. Like we're trying to keep it first in like, here's our core group and like the little spider web around it. Not really jumping out to get anything crazy at the time, but just see what kind of interest we would get from our small circle. Because for me, it's like, that's what I want. Like, those are my people. I want to be able to like bring my people up and like really showcase them, because I think that we're surrounded by incredible artists, incredible community, and I want the rest of the world to know that. So it starts with that. And then, we kind of, during pandemic, other bands are wanting to put out records, so I kind of put this on the side burner. Other things are happening. Finally pick it back up, 2021, 2022, and, reaching out to probably, I would say, 75 different artists of like, hey, we're doing this record, or management, or whatever. Hey, we're doing this record. Here's the SmartPunk bands attached to it. I don't want it to be only SmartPunk bands, just because I do want it to be able to have the biggest reach. And like, our friends, hey, thanks, they're on Iodine Records. It's like, if Iodine Records is posting about this, that's a whole nother community that's going to know. Anything that we could do to get more eyes on the project, I think is the biggest win for everybody. So that was the approach that I took. You've got our core group, you've got Northbound, you've got Suckbrick Kid, you've got Mags, whoever, you've got all those. So cool. I have them pick what kind of song they want first. From that, it's like, okay, I've got 5 out of 15 tracks. Let's see who else I could find. I know that for the Fallen Interlude, which is kind of just like the hip hop like beat track on the record, I was like, dude, I would love if there's like a Travie McCoy kind of freestyle thing going on over this. Like in my mind, I was like, this is perfect for it. So I reached out to a bunch of people that were like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It's like they were doing hip hop stuff. They're not sure how they'd feel about like being on a rock record or like what their community would think. And then there's this dude, Artisan P from Gainesville, who we were just Twitter friends. And I was like, hey, like I made a tweet like, hey, looking for someone who's doing like hip hop to be on this thing, and send me some stuff that you've done. And his just like blew me away. And I was like, this dude's perfect. Like I need this now. So I hit him up. I was like, dude, I don't want to bullshit anymore. Like, this is what I'm doing. I really want you to be a part of it. And he's like, okay, cool. Let me see what I can do. And like 2 days later, sent me back a track that was like done. And I was just like, this is absolutely what I wanted. Like, this is what was in my head. And that was just like solidifying, like, okay, if I'm feeling this way, this person who I didn't even like really tell what was going on is like coming at the same project the same way. Cool. I think we got a good idea. And, so I filled it out. I asked my buddy Mark Rose from Spitalfield if he'd be interested. And I really did want it to be like, hey, I want you to record the song however you would write it. Mags did his own kind of like quirky surf rock vibe on Down, which is kind of a straightforward one. Home Safe, they're just out here doing like Foo Fighters rock. They just did it straight. One Flew West on our label, they already have an acoustic guitar that they play live. So it's like, that was kind of a no-brainer. That was just in it. Suckbrick Kid, 240 BPM kind of pop punk. They took I Miss You, flipped it on its head. And that's exactly what I wanted it to be. I want it to be like, hey, here's the songs you know and love done differently. You're going to like it, you're going to hate it, whatever. But I just want you to get familiar with these bands and see if there's anything that kind of piques your interest with them. So that was awesome, really getting to work with these artists who come from all different genres and kind of using Blink-182 as the center point for all of it that came together for it all. So I was, as soon as every track I got, I was like, dude, you fucking crushed it. Dude, you fucking crushed it. Like, this is great. Molly O'Malley's doing violence. Like we were going back and forth talking about just the song over Twitter DMs, like the bridge to this, the way that they do that chorus different, like that break,
Yeah.
all this stuff that like, you know, you talk about the stuff with the artists all the time that makes the songs like hit, like just bullshitting that online and then hearing their own interpretation of it. I couldn't have asked for a better project, a better group of people to kind of do it with. I got super lucky, man. I really did.
Yeah. It's so interesting because, you know, I mean, we could sit here and probably go back and forth about, you know, the topic of cover songs at large, right? A lot of people have opinions about them, good, bad, ugly, but it's interesting in that you've kind of brought to light something that I very much agree with, where especially songs like this from a band that's so prolific and so widely known and is at the top of, you know, a pretty wide umbrella of a genre, that these songs in a record like this, it's like kind of put out at like right at the prime of, you know, of their career. It presents people when approaching a song, sometimes with what I like to look at it as an opportunity, in that there is already an inherent expectation in that song. Yeah. People know it and are so decidedly familiar with it. So I love the thing that you mentioned, like, you know, I Miss You at 220 BPM, 240 BPM, right? Taking choices and taking an artistic license. So there's a respect to it. And even in that sense where I'm just like, it feels like the old, like Dude Ranch Blink would probably love that you went that hard in the paint for the slow. So you know what I mean? Like
just punk beat throughout it, you know?
Right. And so I really think that that's a cool example, but it's also really important to realize that every band that you're going to, this probably has their favorite song. Every band member in the band might have a different favorite song off that record, if that, or maybe their favorite Blink song isn't even on that record, right? But the project holds enough weight to them that it's interesting. And I love it. So you mentioned Mag's cover and taking a different stylistic approach to it that makes it interesting, right? So like maybe none of these covers are going to be covers that can surpass and supersede the nostalgia of the original version for a lot of people. For sure. But it's an interesting project that reminds people how much they appreciate a lot of those songs and how much they really do remember about those songs by identifying all of the differences, whether they be small or very large. The question that I have here, then kind of shifting towards the logistical challenge end of all of this, right? Outside of the fact that this probably boils down to, I don't know, a scary amount of, you're probably at like 5 figures of emails at this point. But you mentioned something with the Artisan P track, right? An interlude. You mentioned like adding an additional freestyle, cadence over that, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I'm curious, were there moments where artists, maybe perhaps on that track specifically, or any of the others, where they came back with initial material that you as the label and ultimately paying out from a cover standpoint, royalty collection and publishing end of things, had to look at something as, does this walk and talk as just a cover, or is this what one might call a derivative work or something else?
Right.
Because that's often a really interesting gray area. And a lot of independent artists probably know that like you can upload a cover song to DistroKid and just implement it and it'll just take care of the royalties or whatever. Yeah. But sometimes it's not as simple as that, and kind of gets into, I think, a thing that a lot of people don't figure out or don't really understand until they actually have to put out a cover and try and figure out the logistics of it. Or if they really want to kind of run a step further and do something very out of left field with it and potentially extrapolate on the original song idea a little bit. Can you speak to that or anything that you might have seen, whether it was with track 7 or any of the others that maybe brought up some questions?
So I will say I got lucky enough that we had done a covers record before. We put out a Rehasher record that was all covers. Which Rehasher is Roger from Less Than Jake. And it's pretty much him being like, hey, I fucking love these songs. My band, we don't play a lot, but like we got together, we recorded a bunch of covers. Would you be interested in putting out? I was like, absolutely.
Which, by the way, side note, I just have to interrupt you. I'm hot off of Fest. We just got back from Fest. and just watched multiple Less Than Jake sets. And specifically, I have to say, not that I didn't know this before, but goddamn, Roger, what a fucking beast.
Dude, just turned 50. And I'm like,
I know. Unbelievable.
How is anyone, we go on forever.
Anyway, that was just a classic aside. That was just some Less Than Jake low end bass worship. And now, but anyway, a different project of his. So you had some experience walking through the logistical tendrils of cover song releases.
Yeah, it was something that I had literally no idea about. So I was like Googling. And this is before ChatGPT, which I do utilize a lot now for questions I may have. Side note, I am a full proponent of utilizing AI as a tool. So I just want to let that be known. But I was Googling, I was asking lawyer friends. I was like, hey, what do I do for this? And they're like, well, are you just putting it online? If you're just putting it like on a digital service provider like Spotify, Apple Music, they handle everything. It's only if you're like going to sell any copies that you have to worry about it. I was like, okay, cool. Well, yeah, I'm going to press it onto vinyl and sell. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what we do here at SmartPunk. And they're like, okay, so you need to pay the royalties. And there's a handful of sites that really walk you through this and hold your hand. The one that we used at that time was called Easy Song Licensing. There's a bunch of them that you can do this. And it's pretty much you input the song or songs in this case that you're going to be pressing to whatever medium. Yep. You let it know what kind of medium you're doing, whether it be a CD, a vinyl record, a ringtone, kind of whatever, and how many copies you're doing, or, you know, if it's a download, like how many you expect to do, and you pay the fee, and they handed the money over to the rights holders. They take their percentage, whatever. So that was kind of my idea about going to this. It was like, okay, well, cool. Like, this is just all covers. And that one, the Artisan P one in particular, is like, okay, it isn't just the cover. It's like we're using the beat that was there. And there's a couple changes, but like nothing where it's like, you know, the I Miss You cover where it's a completely night and day different song, just same kind of composition. Right. So that one was a little tricky, but it was like, again, just reaching out to Easy Song Licensing. I was like, hey, here's the original track. Here's our cover. What are my legal ramifications? What do I need to do to cover our ass, cover the artist's ass, make sure, like, last thing I want to do is make anyone in the Blink-182 camp upset at me, you know? So what do I do? And dude, I mean, honestly, everyone that I talked to during this whole project was so easygoing. Like, we love that you're doing this. Here's what you need to get done. So yeah, it came down to, okay, how many copies are we pressing? This is your percentage on the song. This is how many songs you're doing. Here's how much money you owe. If you decide to do more, or if there's like an overage in your pressing, you know, come back to us and we'll change that number. If you go into a second pressing, come back, we'll get you another license. Everything will be easy because you already have the initial paperwork, blah, 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 blah. So it really is just like, don't be scared. Do things by the book. It's not difficult to do. And that's me saying it from a label that doesn't want to get screwed over. If you want to just do a punk record and put it as a hidden track on it and not tell anyone, then fuck it, do it and see what happens. You know, I think that's awesome. I'm down with that too.
Yeah, dude, I mean, that's very punk of you. and that's a great point, right? Is like, you know, don't be afraid to just figure it out, right? You know, you can just dive in. There's, I'm sure, mistakes that have been made, maybe long before you got there, or maybe, you know, still probably making mistakes on a day-to-day basis. As like you said, we all learn. You're still learning to this day. Got on here hoping I would learn something, you know, take away. And that's a great, you know, easysonglicense.com. Is that was that site specifically that you used? Easy Song License or Easy Song Licensing. Okay, cool. We'll find it and try and throw that in the show notes too. Cause that's even just resources like that can help disarm a little bit of that fear of the unknown, especially when it comes to this kind of thing, right? If you're listening to this show, I'm guessing there's a good chance that you're the type of person that appreciates the time and effort that goes into something meaningful, something lasting, and something that tells the world exactly who you are. Well, Brett and Dave, the co-founders of our sponsor, Oxford Pennant, share that very same appreciation. They've made it easier than ever to elevate any space in your life and express your style with their meticulously crafted American-made pennants. From classic designs to customized creations, each piece is a work of art. It's quality you can feel and a statement that truly lasts a lifetime. I recently had the pleasure of touring their Buffalo-based shop where they tirelessly make each piece by hand. And honestly, their process really is an inspiring fusion of passion and precision. So go make your mark, celebrate your story, and discover the epitome of timeless craftsmanship and personalized expression by visiting oxfordpennant.com today. As you mentioned, a lot of these, looking at the track listing here, were already SmartPunk bands. So they were already signed to the label. So it's a little bit easier probably, to figure out logistically how that works.
Right.
Because they've already, done a deal with the label and are familiar. But for those that maybe didn't, how did that work out? And was there any other thing, going out to like other like non-label artists and having, feeling the need to like sign some sort of agreement or figure it out to make it work for everybody and make it fair for everybody?
Yeah. So initially with this record, I knew we probably couldn't pay up front to have everyone go into a studio, do it. Not everyone went to a studio. Some people have recording at their houses. Some people kind of just did it on their laptop, whatever it may be. But I want to make sure that everyone was kind of getting the same deal out the door. So for what I did is on the digital and sales portion, it's a 50-50 net profit split. So the minute that we start making $1, we all split the money evenly. Every band will get the same amount of money. Everything's nice like that. And every band is going to be getting 50 copies of the vinyl, of a band-specific vinyl to do whatever they want, whether they want to give it away, sell it at shows, put it online, doesn't matter, up to them. So I wanted them to, because again, if they're selling it at the shows, a bad luck fan gets it, they put it on, they hear Virginity's cover of Here's Your Letter, they're like, oh, that rocks. They go and check out Virginity. Like, or that happens and someone listens to Couplet's version of Lost Without You, they check out Couplet. From Couplet, they then check out like Into It Over It and You Blew It and all this shit. And it's like the amount of unfurling that could happen from this comp in my mind is like, oh, cool. Everyone's going to win tenfold by the end of it. And for me, that is all that I want to carry with SmartPunk, is that everything that we're doing is we're building the community up. We're doing everything with the artist in mind. And we're really trying to make a difference and show you that like you can work with labels and it doesn't have to be shitty. And like there are good people out there in the industry, no matter how scary it may seem. Like there's people who, like me, were artists. Brett Gurewitz playing in Bad Religion, from fucking nothing punk shows to being the head of the biggest indie label now, is like, I look at that, I'm like, that is the dream. You know what I mean? And the dude still answers emails on the regular. And I'm just like, this is insane that I'm like saying, hey, Brett. And he says, hey, Matt. And I'm just like, what fucking world am I living in that I'm able to do this?
It can be done with taste and it can be done with class and a heart. And that's kind of what, and I agreed, especially as we kind of enter into this very like independent artist friendly environment and this like music industry 2.0 world, right? Where everybody is just like, fuck you, DIY or die. Like, I don't need anything. Labels suck. It's like the whole reason, like, and that paradigm is shifting a little bit too. But I think there are other groups of people that say, hey, I can't tour with my band, for the rest of my life, but I still want to work on music and still want to work with bands that I really love, right? Like before I toured with them, right? Or I booked shows and asked them to come play. I'm not doing that anymore. Where can I go? And some artists are creating labels or even other business models that probably haven't even been invented yet, right? That are trying to facilitate in some way the growth of a specific community or a specific type of artists and creatives. And there is a way, I genuinely think, for it to be beneficial to people, especially in a thing like this, where, as you mentioned, it's taking and this is kind of, I want to like throw to like, okay, you got the physical product, you've figured out all of the logistical, contract end of things, royalty, split, licensing, right? Like all of the fees attached to it. And then you have the product, and then you have to figure out the idea of like, okay, how are we going? What's the promotional and marketing end of this comp? How do we create awareness, right? Like
Yeah.
making people like, great, if a Blink-182 compilation record pops up in a bunch of boxes in the forest and nobody knows about it, who cares, right? But the first part of this that I really love is that it harkens back to something that you've been mentioning a few different examples of, and I also love too, but you don't see as much anymore, which were those like label samplers, right? And things like that effectively, the drive-through comp era was obviously massive, right? Like that was the bread and butter for a small label to incubate and promote their new artists, right? Long before you had to go on Instagram and say, okay, find me people that follow this existing artist and, pay a bunch of money to get a bunch of ads that they swipe past in front of them, right? It was our brand, what we're about. This band is on our label. That's why you should trust our label because we signed this band. Check out all these others.
Oh, dude, you're hitting the nail on the head with that.
They would put exclusive singles that hadn't been released or exclusive songs from that band that you couldn't find anywhere else, some of which admittedly were probably carve-outs in a maybe unfavorable deal, but we won't get into that, right? But the idea here is that, as you said, the physical product itself. And did you mention, so each band got 50 band exclusive or 15?
50, 50. They're going to be getting 50.
That's awesome, right? And so that idea alone is that the physical product from a collector standpoint becomes this really cool niche marketing thing that creates awareness at shows in person with these bands across the merch table, which is like that one-on-one connection completes that cycle. And if you're going out to a show or ending up at a show with that band and can see them, look them in the eyes and see this and be like, yo, what is this? And walk away with a literal, like more than just a flyer of, hey, check out these bands. It's
marketing.
You know what I mean? And the record itself is not only a banner and a bulletin, so to speak, letting you know of like, here's a track listing of 15 bands that all love and respect this era Blink-182. Okay, cool. I know I immediately have at least something in common with all 15 of those bands, right? That's pretty powerful stuff. But on top of the fact that you have a highly collectible vinyl on the other end where they know, hey, this is a world and a community that loves vinyl. And a lot of you probably collect all of your favorite records on vinyl, right? And collect reissues and are always looking for them. That's like such a, in the business world, what they call a value added, proposition, but is really neat that someone can walk in, never hear of a band. And even if they didn't catch their set that night, go see this at their merch table and be like, what is this? Oh, wow, that's a really cool concept. Oh, this band's on it? Oh, cool. Oh, I actually recognize this other band. You know what? Let me get this. I love this concept, right? Which is pretty unheard of to buy a physical pressing of anything that you've never heard a single piece of music on it yet, right? And so that alone is really interesting.
Especially nowadays when money is coveted, we're not living in the stimulus check era anymore, and you really need to want something to buy it now. And I think we're all e-commerce is seeing that kind of happen.
Yep. It gets harder and harder to drive sales even for bands that have a fan base,
Exactly.
So I kind of took that one portion out of it, but talk to me about the rest of it, because obviously a label, you're putting a ton of money up front to get this pressed, to get it made in some really cool colorways, by the way, as well. What does the conversation turn to in terms of putting together a full cohesive plan to market this and promote it so that everybody feels good about spending, I don't know, what do you think, just without obviously, whatever you feel comfortable with, how much does it cost to get these pressings made and how long? Like, go into that a little bit for people that maybe aren't familiar with vinyl pressing, because I think that's also an interesting thing that you really have to like get all of your ducks in a row long before anybody ever sees a piece of this, right?
Yeah, and that's something that I learned through pandemic is that, everyone was looking at vinyl turnaround times being crazy. Everyone was blaming the Adele double LP. There's so many things that are going on with it. And it's like, the truth of the matter is vinyl is still a growing industry year over year. It has not slowed down. Everyone's pressing records. It's awesome because, truthfully, I love putting a record on, holding the lyric sheet in front of me, reading it, getting this other piece of art that gets to like just swallow me whole into the whole thing. And then I have to stand up and flip it over and I get to do the whole thing again. Like, I It's the same for me. It's the audio version of going to a movie theater and seeing a movie, which I would not trade for the world. Coming to the vinyl side of it, it is, okay, well, now I have all these tracks. Everyone has sent me their wave. Awesome. What do I do now? So I take all of them. And I get them all mastered at the same mastering house because I want them all to be sonically as balanced as they can be. These songs are all over the place, but I want them all to be great. And I sent them to the blasting room, which I love all of the stuff they've done. They've done a bunch of our records, and I kind of explained myself to them as like, hey, here's a bunch of shit that might not, like, the levels might look all different. I haven't put it into any software or anything to see what it looks like. Like, I'm so sorry. And they're like, oh, no, dude, this is awesome. Like, we'll get this going and we'll have it to you within 48 hours.
Amazing. Well, this is a studio podcast sometimes, so talk real quick about the blasting room and the lore. For some people listening might be familiar with it, but I think this is just a cool, quick little aside that it's like, the mastering, which we've talked a lot about. We've had some mastering engineers on the show and some people that have touted out some really incredible mastering engineers that they work with. It's an important step, especially not just when, typically you have a record, it all recorded by the same band, a lot of times all in the same go at the same studio, sometimes with a similar producer, right? This could not be further from that. So making sure the whole thing reads and plays as a cohesive string, even though musically it might be all over the place, is even more important because you want people to like have somewhat of an enjoyable experience listening to something that could otherwise already be pretty jarring, right? So, and
especially like the dork in me was like, oh man, the fade between Easy Target into all of this where they slow it down and it warbles, like, how do I get that across on these two artists that are doing it in two completely different styles? Again, like you said, two different studios. Like, so it's talking to Jason over at the blasting room, Jason Livermore, fucking awesome dude. And I just explained like paragraphs on like me going into these songs and how I imagine them all flowing together. And there's a little bit of back and forth, but the way he got it, I was like, I want it to be this way digitally, but then on vinyl, I need it to be this way. And he was able to like knock all that out because, we'll get into like how I release this digitally in a second. But yeah, Jason, Blasting Room, also owned by Bill Stevenson from Descendants. Awesome, awesome place. You can look them up. Probably some of your favorite bands recorded there or had something done by some of those people. Nicest dudes in the world. We had a record by one of our bands, Talk Me Off, where they wanted to get mastered by Jason. We got a quote back and the band was like, it's a little bit out of our budget. And they're like, oh dude, we don't want your budget to like negate you having a good experience. So like, we'll do it for that.
Yeah.
For whatever you can do. And it's like, I don't want you to go to them and be like, hey, give me a better rate. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's people out there who are still willing to work with, the little guys and shit like that. So it's awesome.
Yeah. Who want to make projects that are worthwhile happen and want to be part of the team. And they truly are part of the team, right? They're not just like, it's not just transactional, right? And I think a lot of people think that because sometimes there's plenty of people that are like, send me the tracks, I'll mix it, you pay me, shut up. You know what I mean? Yeah, but 100%. That is there's way more people out there that are like, no, if they're saying yes, it's not just the money. It's that they really probably see something in the pursuit of the art that's getting made. And I function that same way. I definitely spend way more time than I've ever and will ever be compensated for working on stuff for other bands because I know what it feels like to be a band, and that's your baby.
And have somebody else care.
Yeah, that one song, that one album is everything to you, and that's the hill to die on. So it's true, and exactly. Blasting Room is legendary, and anybody that someone like Bill Stevenson is bringing in or working with side by side are going to be that way and are going to truly get it. So that's awesome that they had a hand in this and made it possible for y'all as well. And yeah, so talk to me about then too, because obviously, just as an aside. From a mastering standpoint, it requires a slightly different mastering approach to get something ready for physical vinyl pressing than maybe it does for digital releases nowadays. So many people are probably at least a little bit familiar with that potentially, but if not, that you should know that. So then talk to me about on the digital end of things, and then rolling out this whole, promotional campaign. How do we take the steps, and what did you get ready, and what were some of the objectives that you guys put in place?
I knew I want to have this record out by the anniversary of the record, or as close to the day of the anniversary of the record. So I was like, okay, Friday, November 17th, because every record comes out on Fridays now, whatever reason that's for. Friday, November 17th, this record has to be out. So let me work backwards. And me and Jordan here were like going back and forth of like, how do we release this? Should we have it be like, should we go backwards? Should we go forward? Like, should we have every song be its own standalone track? Should we put it out as groups or what they call waterfall singles so that, you know, by the time you get to the Suck Brick Kid song, you know, it's I Miss You, then track 2 would be Obvious by Hey Thanks, track 1 would be Feeling This by Northbound. And we ultimately decided, like, let's let each band have their own shining moment. And, like, we're going to promote each one the same and just let it exist on their own page as that. Interestingly enough, like a little bit before we decided to do that, the Barbie record came out, the compilation, and it was kind of set up the same way, where it's like the Lizzo track does not correlate to the Ryan Gosling track, but they all appear on this record, and you have to search the record by name in order to see it in like track listing order, sequencing order. So this record will be the same way. Every artist will have their own song on their page. If you want to see the whole record, you got to look up the whole thing. So I think it's kind of cool. It's a little bit more to seek out, but you know, that's kind of the fun of it. Yeah. It is what it is. So we decided that each artist is going to get their own week. And we're going to start it with Feeling This, which is what Blink started their rollout with for this record. And it's a Northbound track, and he fucking crushed it with this one. I mean, it's a very similar sounding to the original Feeling This, with John's voice on top of it, which he is one of my favorite singers, songwriters of all time. So I was like, we're going to kick it off with a very strong push. I know that. Not saying that any of the other tracks are anything different, but it's like everyone knows this song off the record. It's going to be a good one. So we worked with our PR team and we worked with our distro, and we're like, hey, sorry for this headache. Here's what we're going to do. Every Tuesday, we figure the timeline backwards, starting with right. The record's coming out November 17th. The Tuesday before that is November 14th, I think is the last track, which is Eternal Boy doing Not Now, which was the B-side. Whole nother thing. Big dorks here. But it's like, okay, so 15 weeks leading up to that one is what we need. So we worked out Eternal Boy. Before that was Couplet, and then Virginity, and so on and so forth, until we got to the first track being This Day. And we're like, okay, so now we want everything to come out a week apart and starting 1, 2, 3, 4, and all that stuff. So our PR team was like, this is awesome. It's going to be very hard to get anyone to kind of cover all of this stuff just because it's a lot of things happening at one time. But we could probably do an announce and then kind of like a follow-up piece. And I'm like, great. I'm not looking for PR to necessarily pick up every cover that we're doing. That would be sick, but it's not something that I'm betting on. And that's kind of what happened. We launched the record with Feeling This. We had a limited variant of a record out of 182 copies on a Poo-Poo PP variant, which was a last-minute decision. I'm going to give my friend Justin a little nod here. He was the one who was like, oh, you should do this. This would be funny. And I was like, yeah, we can do that. We have those colors to like make this work. So thank you, Justin, for that. Our Poo-Poo PP variant out of 182. And it like sold out within a day or maybe 2 days. I was just like, holy shit. Like the idea that I had during pandemic is finally coming to a realization and people are fucking with it. And there's no greater feeling than like people enduring or like preparing themselves for that same involvement. It was awesome. It was a very cool feeling. We sold it for a discounted amount as well. I think it was $18.20, I want to say, just to keep with the 182 theme. And I think we're selling the rest of them for like 20 or 25, something like that. But it was just like, we want people to get it and, you know, just kind of enjoy it. Because mostly, just like we've been talking about, this is a promotional tool for all these bands. Like, we're not looking to make any money. If there's money to be made, that is an afterthought. That is awesome. Right. This is a marketing tool for these 15 artists, half of which are our bands, the other half which are just like really cool homies of ours. And I hope it works out for everyone.
Yeah, I have to double back real quick and highlight the numerical significance and the poo-poo and pee-pee variant, which I am so glad that you did mention and said out loud before me, because I was reading the copy here on the website and I'm just like, if we don't bring this up, this is a completely failed miss in the promotional and marketing end of things. That is even just like showing like a realness, showing a sense of humor, a voice that's in line with the band, the era, the album, right? And a sense of humor, which, walks right in line with the artwork that, as you mentioned earlier at the top of it, I think is also super on brand and turned out great. But these are the kind of things that go a long way to be like, hey, we know our community, you know what I mean?
100%.
Like we want to make something that we would get a laugh at and we would think is awesome. Even some stuff like this, where it's just like, or limiting it to 182, right? Like you don't have to do that. Why? But it's just like, it's the same way that it's just like when you feel like you're a band in a van, you think of the dumbest things. And when someone says, why would you think of that? And you're like, because it was funny.
There doesn't need to be a reason.
Right. There almost doesn't need to be a reason for it. And in doing that, it takes on a personality that's real. That's not just, here is this thing. This is a very cold, itemized list of what you will get, like an Amazon item description, right? Like, dimensions, whatever. And so I love that too, that even like, mentioning that and seeing that in the copy, that's written. And even like you said, how it's rolled out, where it's just like, a lot of times, like from a label like that, like to have a release that only shows up if you search it exclusively on a DSP and find all of the tracks together. Yeah. That's really neat, because it gives each artist a chance to have their moment and run with it and share that as part of their relationship with the band, with that community and fans of that band, right? And that was kind of the whole thing, not to mention strategically timed around, yes, the anniversary for the album. And it serendipitously worked out that a lot has happened in that Blink-182 camp since 2020, right? So sometimes we get lucky like this. And the last thing I want to mention, especially in terms of release, promotion, marketing, right? You mentioned this, and if you're someone in a band or work for a label, or trying to help out some friends that are bands or musicians, a lot of questions get worked out. There's a lot to think about in terms of releasing something and trying to do it efficiently, strategically, right? What you mentioned is one of the first big key pieces of advice, which when you say it out loud seems kind of like a no-brainer, but it really holds weight in helping you avoid that overwhelm of, what do I do? There's too much. I have no idea. You worked backwards, right? You set your deadline. You said, okay, what's an important, significant date for whatever reason, right? A lot of times if you're a label, you're like, well, we have a whole other release calendar. So these are the only like couple weeks that we have free and clear that we can give our best attention and focus to, right? Or if you might have two artists that are very similar, you might not want to have those two on the same day, because that's a big ask, right? And so there's a strategic thing in planning out the when, but then also thinking about how much time you'll need for physical, how much time you will need to, set things up in terms of what your digital strategy might be, and answer all those questions. And each time you kind of work backwards to figure out, okay, turns out I needed to start this in 2017, but but all right. And then,
but now I know for next time,
But now I know for next time, or okay, what can we cut out? What's the most important objectives, And then at that point, I'm really like, okay, well, that was my whole wish list of an entire marketing plan. Turns out we don't have time for most of that. What are the main things that I can do that I still have in the time, or if that question really becomes, it's like, are we able to push back? And sometimes, as you mentioned with vinyl pressing, a lot of labels have to do that, right? Like it's just inevitable. Things happen, influxes come in and out. I don't know, things get lost in the mail or damaged, right? Like it's happened, especially when you deal with the physical medium, but you try and set up by working backwards the best you can. And that's the only way you kind of do this. But ironically enough, glad that you kind of had that, like, all right, well, this would be cool to have it on the anniversary date out there ahead. But I love that you mentioned that and how much thought went into it, Matt, because I think even just in this little hour, I think a lot of people can kind of grasp just how many micro decisions and micro conversations go back and forth,
And it's also just like, it comes down to, for me, the care and thought that does go into each project. It's like, I want to make sure, like, as a fan, how would I want this to come across to me? How would I want to see a record label put out a covers comp of a record that I really enjoy? Like, what seems disingenuous? What seems like, oh, these dudes really fucking know what they're talking about? Like, there's all those little things that I'm thinking about. And I'm like, oh, if we made this one out of 182, that's funny. My friend Justin, oh, if you did a poo poo pee pee variant, that'd be funny. It's like, yeah, these are all ideas that are part of the same, the same camp. And it is like, it all works in tandem, I think. And yeah, I mean, we every time we drop another song, more sales trickle in and all the stuff. And each week I've been like releasing who's doing the song that day. There's little teasing that we do.
The end here, like looking on the website, the last two artists on the track list are hidden,
Right,
and are
exactly.
like a yet to be announced, like a to be announced. Even that kind of stuff is awesome. It keeps people engaged. It keeps it feeling like it's progressive, and like it's something that if someone comes in and finds it or sees somebody post about it, they come in and they're not just seeing something that's static, like it's already happened, the moment has passed. It's something that's ongoing and that they
Correct.
just found their way into the middle of. And I think that's I can't take 100% credit for that idea. I think a friend of mine or somebody mentioned that who deals in terms of like digital marketing and social media strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But that is much more of, especially nowadays, the way our brains think. And if you can create something that makes someone feel like, oh, I want to see where this goes, that kind of in media race phenomenon and feeling, as opposed to, yeah, here's this static poster on the wall. It went out, it happened. Now, like, who cares? Versus, hey, this is a poster that every week it slowly changes color. And you're like, well, I kind of want to come back next week and see what it's going to be,
100%.
So I love that too. And that even, you bake some of that in here on the website, something very subtle. You didn't have to do that, right? For all I know, that's a great way of being like, hey, we honestly didn't know who the last two were going to be.
Right,
when
exactly.
We had to put all the stuff, you know what I mean? Like,
I still don't know. It's a surprise to me too.
They wouldn't even tell me when they sent it to mastering, actually. But that's actually great too. So there's so much here that you can do with kind of letting your inner fandom guide you too. Would you have, I think maybe take us out, it might be a nice way for anybody listening, like musicians, maybe in the independent realm or somebody else that has their own small label or is releasing music or thinking about doing a cover or paying homage to one of their really big influences. What would you, do you have any recommendations or anything that you learned across the last couple of years putting this together that you think might be valuable for them?
I would say to just follow your gut, follow your heart. I mean, it all started with passion. It has to finish with passion. And people will definitely be able to tell when things are disingenuous. I mean, Me living in the vinyl world, when I see a reissue happen and I'm like, oh shit, so-and-so, like, I don't want to call anyone out, but it's like, oh, they just scanned in whatever record cover and blew it up and it looks like shit and it sounds like shit. And this is obviously a cash grab. I don't want, nothing that we do at SmartPunk is ever like that. I know there's a lot of people that we work with that also take really good care of making sure that they're either recreating the artwork or getting the high res files and making sure that like everything is good. It's not just, hey, we're putting up 1,000 copies of this to sell out and now we've made $20,000 and we're happy and see ya. Thanks for the money. But same goes for music. Like, you shouldn't be writing for anyone else because you're going to get burnt out. You shouldn't be doing a label for anyone else because you're just going to hate every day that you're working on it. And it's like, dude, the amount, and I know you feel the same way, the amount of time that I put into this mostly thankless job, if I didn't love most of it, I would have just lit myself on fire by now. But thankfully, I'm surrounded by good people. I love it. I mean, going to Fest was a very great, like, breather to run into old friends and just be part of the community, like, physically. And it's just, it means so much to me, man. Like, this whole thing, music in general, like the scene, whatever you want to call it, has gotten me into such a great place that, like, I wouldn't trade it in for anything. And I think if you're doing it, you probably have that same feeling. And don't lose sight of that. Like, that's the most important thing. So
Yeah, dude, it's that I couldn't have said it better, dude. That why is what's going to propel you when at best most of what we do will probably only ever be a net zero. We're aiming to just not lose, or cut the
100%.
losses. So if we can get squared up by the end of the day doing something that we love, that we definitely spent way more hours than we had on, yeah, then at least you get that thing that can walk with you that you can be proud of. You know what I mean? For me in a band, for you, it's the records that we make. It's the records that everybody listening makes. Hopefully, and even, I mean, with this show, right? It's like they didn't need another guy talking about making records for a podcast, but it was something that I really love to do, that Tom really loves to do, and that the idea is everybody that comes on here to share their story of the music that they make and put out into the world, that they also love to do as well, which is, kind of talk about it and unpack, their love for it and their process and their experience and pass it forward. So it's not going to be a moneymaker. It's not going to be like a great career path shift, but it's something that even it'll always take me way more time than I think it's going to, number one. But at the end of the day, if I look back on, the conversations we have, that's awesome. If there's a couple hundred people listening at any given point to any given episode, and even if one person, maybe it's somebody I know, maybe it's somebody I don't know, listens and grabs something from a guest that we have on, or a place that we kind of enter into in a conversation that keeps them going, that's awesome. Because damn, do I know that I've needed that as a creative at certain points. And I know you have probably at certain points, even with this, this compilation at certain points, you're like, fuck, man. And maybe you needed to go back or hear somebody like talk about that record or talk about a song, or.
Honestly, yeah, 100%. That is it. I would throughout all this, I would listen to the record and I would talk to people about it, and we would just share stories about it, and we'd share YouTube videos and like live performances. And I was like, okay, fuck, I'm back in. I'm all in. Let's go, baby.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it rekindles that fire.
You need to do it. And I've even noticed right now with like the project that I mentioned earlier, like I have to, it's tough because I go on tour for a couple months. I get disconnected from it. I have to get reinvigorated with the mindset and like re-excite and reignite that fire to do it. And the second I do it, I'm like, oh, I'm back in. There's no way I would have ever left, but you have to know that and curate that. And I think that's part of that kind of roller coaster that you mentioned as being in music or anything creative. It's a marathon, not a sprint. If we all woke up with that, like, oh my God, I'm going to sit down and write the best song I've ever written right now today, and then just did it in an hour and it was that easy, it's clearly not how that works, right?
Right.
Most people are like, okay, cool, I got this one line that's rad. Fuck, I got nothing else. Damn it, I hate this. All right, I'll come back tomorrow.
And then 5 years later, they come back. That's the line in the chorus. That's the hook. And then you're the 1975. Awesome. Cool. There you go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that does happen too, but it rarely is it as easy as we want to think it's going to be. So I think if we can prep ourselves and set ourselves up to say, hey, really let me put whatever ideas I have up against this and make sure that if I'm going to green light it, it's going to be something that I can see myself riding those peaks and valleys through. You know what I mean? And that's the biggest thing. I mean, that's a lot of people are like, how to Wonder Years, like just put out our 7th record. How do you get 7 records deep? It's not a thing I ever thought I would do, right? Or have anybody allow me to do.
Dude, that's crazy. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks, dude. But really, realistically, what it is like, oh, we learned how to suffer through and shelter the burden of what it feels like every single record to be like, there's no way God, I don't know. I don't think we have it, to just get through that self-doubt and all the roadblocks and hurdles. That's it. And the more you do it, the more you're like, hey, regardless of how challenging this is or whatever problems come up, I remember that last time it also, even though I don't want to believe it, was as challenging and we got through it. So keep putting your head down. And then, a couple of years later, you have a project that's really meaningful to not only 15 bands that are on it, but everybody that was involved in it. That'll live on forever, right? You're doing how many copies overall? About like 1,400? Okay, well, yeah. So,
because I don't think I have the band copies listed online, but I think overall it is like a 2000 press. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah. And that's a really neat thing that I am excited for you and all of the bands years later at some distro, maybe it's a SmartPunk distro or somebody else, to come across that record and be like, oh, whoa, this is awesome, right? Maybe that's the 40-year anniversary, 50-year anniversary of that record, right? And I think that's really neat and something that keeps the whole scene going. And maybe that's probably going to inspire somebody else to do something really neat and meaningful in their own community moving forward. So thanks for all the hard work, and thank you for sharing everything that goes into it.
If I had one wish for whoever's listening, it would be, please bring compilations back. Please bring splits back. Like that stuff to me growing up, listening to the Vagrant Records comps and the Epitaph and stuff, like there's so much growth and learning from that. I remember I found out about Pianos Become the Teeth from like a Touche Amore split. And like there's so much cool shit that you can do when you bring a community in. And it doesn't have to be just your label. You could be doing it with another label. You could be doing it with somebody from another country. And you could be, you could have half international bands and half domestic bands, whatever you want. Like a rising tide raises all ships. And that's always how I feel about the music industry. And, I think bands like yourselves, bands like Less Than Jake are proponents of that, where it's like you're taking out fresh bands. You're taking out friends who may have not played in a while, like all this stuff. Like when My Chem brought out Midtown and Thursday, it was like incredible shit. You know what I mean? And I think we're all just looking for that same escapism, and we're all doing the same shit. So it's like, keep going for it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's interesting. I mean, you see a lot of like collab and feature, performances and recordings happening in the digital like streaming world.
Yeah.
And, where people, it's the same to a certain degree, the same kind of mentality where people are like, I'll put you in front of my fan base. You put me in front 100%. Of yours, and everybody wins. And, people that are listening win the most because they find another artist that maybe is going to be their new favorite band. And I agree. I think it's so strong. I mean, the power of a full length compilation like that.
Hopefully it's cool.
Right. It's like, you'd be pretty hard pressed to be a Blink-182 fan and look in and be like, hey, out of 15 bands, you didn't dig any of them,
right.
I mean, come on, whereas at least a split, you're like, well, I either do or don't like the other band on this. Right. But it is really effective. And I think, that mindset where I think it's because there are so many, and there always have been. I remember our band came up in the MySpace era, right? Where you were like, well, this band has like 27 more plays than us today. So, I mean, technically they could say they're bigger than us. So maybe they should headline the show or whatever. But instead of that being like, yo, together, like that band probably has 27 people that maybe never have heard of our band. And we probably have 27 people that are not listening to their band yet, and that's the point where you can both win. There's space for everybody. And that was very much apparent in the era of compilations. And I love that, bringing that through not only still with like to the physical medium, but then to the digital world and rolling it out like that. Now you can have bands across the world. It's like your new favorite band might be somewhere in like Europe or Southeast Asia right now. You know what I mean? And if they end up on the same comp underneath one banner global artist, boom, it cracks things wide open. And that is an idea that really excites me. And I think that's what you've, set out to do here and did it in a really, really interesting, neat, tasteful way with some great bands. Again,
thank you,
Philly Pride Goalkeeper.
Yeah.
I was always a huge Spitalfield fan. So it's cool to see that Mark was on there. Mags, obviously, who we had on last season of the show, and a bunch of other great ones. So yes, I'll have to try to finagle a copy.
I think I know a guy who could get you one. Don't worry about it.
But again, really appreciate it. Matt, thank you so much for sharing with everybody. And we'll talk to you soon.
Cool, dude. Thanks. Cheers.
Before an artist starts creating original work, they first learn the craft by emulating the work that they like. Covering a song is one of the first steps a band can take in understanding who they are and who they want to become. We see inspiration turn to imitation, which evolves into a series of choices that can ultimately galvanize the DNA of an artist. In this case, we talked about Blink-182 and how they were an immensely influential band. And we talked about how their Untitled album, regardless of how you feel about it, gave rise to a massive wave of young musicians who ultimately found their creative voices through the experimentation that those songs inspired. As original artists, we don't always get the chance to slow down and appreciate the progress that we've made or the guidance that we've benefited from along the way. This project gave 15 bands that priceless opportunity. The opportunity to appreciate where they came from, the chance to showcase their pride in who they've become, and to acknowledge their part in a movement that is much larger than any individual band ever could be. A community that is shaped by the collective actions of all of its bands, while also serving as a force that continually influences the work of those bands themselves. So this week, take a moment to reflect on the things that have inspired you, the progress you've made, and the people waiting to be inspired by the work that you do. And when you're done, we'll catch you right back here next time on
The Record Process.